Hi, this is Chowclips, and you are listening to Tale of the Manticore.
The following podcast is intended for a mature audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Tale of the Manticore, Season 3. Like the creature from which it takes its name, Tale of the Manticore is a mashup, a crossbreeding between two different species of storytelling. Here you will find the unpredictability of old-school paper and dice games with the storycraft of a dark fantasy novel. No character is sacred, and none will be spared if the dice decide their fate is at hand. According to lore, the tail of a manticore is barbed with cruel iron spikes. There will be much pain in the days ahead. Last time on Tale of the Manticore. Chapter 10 begins with our second level up of the game, and when the story continues, it does so with the flashback showing a younger Achillea as she fills her spellbook with magic she doesn't understand. Reaching level 2 unlocks one of the spells that has always eluded her. When we return to the present, we learn the result of an earlier wandering encounter roll. 4 orcs have survived a vicious battle among their own kind, and they are looting the bodies of the dead when the companions happen upon them. Once aware of the party's presence, they attack. The combat that ensues goes well for the PCs, who escape with only minor injuries and manage to kill all 4 of the enemy orcs. During the fight, Cord casts the spell Entangle for the first time, surprising himself and everyone else with his ability to command nature. Once the battle is over, the companions spend some time looking for items of value among the dead. After a while, Tentir calls out. It seems he has found something interesting. Chapter 11, Part 1. Day 11. Night. Mythic event meaning. Abandoned suffering. Party status. Achillea, 7 of 7 hit points. Cord, 9 of 11. Dureni, 6 of 6. Tentir, 4 of 6. Supplies. The companions have 14 portions of food and 9 of water. Spells available. Achillea has memorized Shrink. Cord can cast Locate Plants and Animals.
Dureni, come over here and look at this!
Tentir was crouching down in front of a pile of orc bodies. He unceremoniously lifted one of the corpse's legs as his brother approached to show him the bottom of a heavy boot.
Are there others like this?
Dureni wanted to know.
It seems like every other one,
Came the reply.
What does that mean?
Asked Achillea. She could see that the bottom of the orc's boot had been painted rusty red, but she didn't understand the implication. When Tentir had called out, she'd been hunting for a dagger to replace her lost one. The blade in her hand was the 5th she had inspected, but only the first to meet with her approval. Orcish weapons were crude and poorly made for the most part.
Half of these dead belonged to the Bloodfoot tribe. Their home is miles to the south and east, close enough to the Setevi Marsh that they are known to us,
explained Tentir.
Who are the other half, then?
Dureni shrugged.
I have no idea. There are no markings on their weapons or armor.
As she'd rifled through their belongings, Achillea had noticed that some of the orcs bore tattoos on their forearms. She pointed this out to the 2 brothers, while Cord stood patiently nearby, listening to, but unable to follow their conversation.
Yes, these do seem to be tribal markings,
said Dureni, inspecting several of them.
but I've not seen their like before.
The tattoos were, like the weapons and armor, crudely made. They didn't resemble much of anything beyond black smears. Perhaps that's why Dureni hadn't noticed them before.
What do you make of these?
He asked Tentir. The other elf examined the tattoos in the low light and shrugged helplessly. After Achillea explained their conversation to Cord and asked his opinion, the wooden construct scratched a dowel finger against his chin and then pointed at the sky.
Clouds?
Asked Achillea.
Black clouds?
Cord nodded in his way. He was not wrong, she thought, cocking her head to one side. They did somewhat resemble clouds. She stood up, tucking the new dagger into her belt along with the old one.
Have you ever heard of a Black Cloud tribe?
She asked the brothers. They frowned and shook their heads.
We should discuss it later.
Suggested Tentir.
For now, let's get clear of this place. Find somewhere to make camp.
He looked around, peering into the gloaming.
There might be more of them.
He had a point. There were a lot of bodies on the ground, perhaps more than 24, but not enough to constitute a whole tribe, let alone 2, if what Aldra had taught her was correct.
Good idea.
Achillea said.
Let's get Wait a minute. What's that?
She interrupted herself when something among the dead caught her eye. It was a flash of gold. Between the lines. The elves and the orcs of Marith. For the past 4 years, I've shied away from writing about elves and orcs. Aside from a single brief encounter with an elf in Season 1, both races have been absent from Tale of the Manticore, and not for no reason. Elves and orcs are hard to write about, but I'm embracing what I feel is a tough challenge this season, in part because the dice have led me to it, but also because I think I'm more up to the task this time around. At least, I hope I am. So what's so tough about using elves and orcs? A lot, actually. Old-school D&D elves are a Tolkien-esque Mary Sue race. They are good at everything and have all kinds of advantages over the other races. I've already talked about that in an earlier episode, so I won't rehash my concerns on that front. In Tale of the Manticore, I'm taking them down a few pegs, separating race and class so they aren't all spellcasters. I'm reimagining them as something one might call wild elves, or wood elves. Dureni and Tentir are not the tall, silvery-haired, angel-like beings of Middle-earth, but are closer to the characters of the ElfQuest comic, if you happen to remember that series. They live in smaller communities that are integrated into the natural environment in a way that humans would find very chaotic and distressingly asymmetrical. Their culture, like songs and art and poetry, as well as the things they produce, such as weapons and armor and other mundane items, would be made over very long periods of time, and their quality would reflect that. However, elven lifespans won't last 1,000 years in Tale of the Manticore. The character Valkeen, for example, is 230 years old. 300 would be considered ancient. Elvenkind will also be shorter in stature than seems canon in D&D. They'll measure 4 to 4.5 feet tall, and will have physical strength that matches their size and weight. That's enough about elves for now, but let's talk about their ancestral enemies for a bit. Orcs are, in many ways, the anti-elf, opposite in body and mind. They make things quickly, poorly, and with speed of production valued over durability. The life of an orc is short, even by human standards, as very few survive the commonplace violence of their society and habits long enough to become old. Now, if elves of gaming and literature tend towards too perfect, orcs are, well, they kind of seem to have an identity crisis. Are they the brutish beastmen of Tolkien's world? Are they the green-skinned noble savages found in Blizzard's World of Warcraft series? I'm tending towards the former, using an old trope of orcs having porcine faces and pale pinkish-gray skin. Tale of the Manticore orcs are tribal and nomadic. They all mark themselves with some sign or other, as we've seen with the Bloodfoot tribe and the Black Clouds. Orcish leaders would be either warlords or shamans, in cases where they're being led by their own kind, and not some other type of more powerful being. I wanted to mention that when I realized I'd be getting into the world of orcs in some depth. My research brought me to the Monster Man podcast, hosted by James Halloway. His episode on them was fascinating. Apparently, the word orc doesn't come from Tolkien, as I'd assumed, but from a combination of Old English and Etruscan mythologies, where they're called Orknea. I might be mispronouncing that, by the way, which means evil spirit or monster that devours. It's a pretty broad description, but I'd say it solves the can orcs be good debate. The verdict is in. They cannot. Orcs are evil to the core. It's right in the name. If it had been 1 hour later, or if the moon had been less bright, she might have missed it. a little flash of gold peeking out from under a blood-soaked cloak worn by one of the bigger orc corpses. She reached down and hefted a wooden chest the size of a loaf of bread. It was heavy, and she could hear the distinct sound of coins, lots of them, sliding around within. The flash she'd taken for gold turned out to be a clasp made of brass.
Open it,
said Tentir, his eyes wide. He had got the sound too.
Maybe we should leave this place before we do that.
Achillea replied, suddenly feeling exposed and looking around into the encroaching shadows of the night. Cord was not really paying them any attention. He too had seen something of interest, and on the same corpse that carried the chest. Bending down, he retrieved a battle axe with a squared-off blade on one side and a spike on the other. Dureni walked over to inspect the construct's find.
That's not of orc manufacture,
he said.
Most likely it was made by men.
Are there men in this part of the world?
Asked Achillea. She hadn't mentioned Edo to Dureni or his brother, and didn't intend to. The elf shrugged.
Honestly, I have no idea, but I like your idea of putting some distance between us and this place more and more, Achillea.
One last thing,
said Tentir, crouching by the dead orc's feet. He lifted a heavy boot and inspected the bottom.
Bloodfoot?
Asked Dureni. Tentir shook his head.
Must be from the other tribe. Should we strip his armor and check his forearms for markings?
Waste of time,
opined Dureni.
He must be one of the Black Clouds, or whatever you wish to call them. There will have only been the 2 tribes here.
Come on, let's go,
said Achillea, impatient to leave. The crows were starting to return, and they made her nervous for some reason. As there was nothing else to do at the site of the orcs' battle, everyone agreed and headed for the nearest tree line as the silvery half-moon shone above them. I wonder why it is that these 2 tribes are fighting. It's probably a territorial dispute, but what pushed one tribe into the path of the other to begin with? The simplest answer can be supplied by my event meaning, abandoned suffering. I interpret this as one tribe, the Bloodfoot tribe, having been driven out of their lands by something that caused them terrible hardship. So, what kind of suffering did they abandon? It could be anything from a big predator, to war, to disease, or something else entirely. But I don't need to figure that out just yet. It's enough to say that the Bloodfoot tribe has come into Black Cloud territory, and the Black Clouds aren't keen to share. Now, despite there being lots of orcs in the vicinity, I'll say that the PCs will not face any more danger tonight. So that means I'm free to make some rolls for day 12. For weather. A 17. That's favorable. I'll say there's a light fog that helps the companions travel unseen, at least in the morning hours. Stumble upon. A 10. No result. Foraging. A 6 on a d6 is a failure. These lands are getting hillier and rockier. Food is scarce. No wonder the Black Cloud tribe can't afford to share their land. Now for a more important wandering encounter roll. A 5 or 6 on a d6 will indicate that there is one. A 5. Wow, this is a dangerous area. This time I won't roll on a table. A simple high-low will do. Low means more orcs. High will trigger a special set-piece encounter I have in mind. The roll. Low. More orcs it will be. At this point, I'm going to roll my d6 one more time and subtract 1. That'll be the number of orcs encountered. So, that's 0 to 5. My roll. Okay, and one more roll for a day or a night encounter. Day. That's enough for now. Any other rolls, I'll make off mic as they become necessary. It's time to get back to the story. Chapter 11. Part 2. Day 12. Afternoon. Mythic event meaning. Move. Stalemate. Huh, how interesting. Party status. Achillea. 7 out of 7 hit points. Cord. 10 out of 11, having healed 1 hit point overnight. Dureni. 6 of 6. Tentir. 5 of 6, having healed 1 hit point overnight. Supplies. The companions have 11 portions of food and 6 of water. Spells available. Achillea has memorized Shrink and Message, Cord can cast, Entangle, and Locate plants and animals. The previous evening, Achillea and Dureni had opened the orc's small chest and discovered 100 coins inside, 50 of silver and 50 of gold. There had also been a dried mushroom, cream-colored with lavender speckles, included in the contents. Achillea knew what it was, an infinity milk cap. Frequently used in alchemy, if consumed, it could separate the eater from their sanity in a matter of minutes, with the effect lasting hours. Tentir and Dureni knew of the plant's properties too, but, more importantly, they knew what its inclusion with the treasure signified. This money was intended as a tribute or bribe. It was common practice among orcs to recruit mercenaries or buy safe passage, and the infinity milk cap was often given as a symbolic gift. The brothers found something confusing, however. The chest had been in possession of a Black Cloud tribe orc, not a Bloodfoot orc, which was the tribe that needed safe passage.
My guess is the Black Cloud double-crossed the Bloodfoot after payment was given. Orcs are not the most honorable of creatures, after all.
They were traveling in single file once again. It was afternoon, and the orange ball of the sun had long ago burned away the cloaking mists that had allowed them to travel without fear of being seen. There were few trees here. The land they crossed was open, and the companions felt exposed. Most terrain that spread out before them to the north was hill and rock. Some hills were bare, others were tufted in tall grass, and the diminutive elves tried to keep to these when possible. One consolation: the same conditions that made them easily visible also permitted them to see far distances. Tentir was in the lead, so it was he who spotted it first. Up ahead, the remnants of a campfire on the lee side of an errant boulder. The companions decided to investigate, and, even after a cursory examination, it was clear.
Orcs made camp here. 3 or 4 of them. Yesterday.
Tentir scowled as he spoke.
I fear we are headed directly into the heart of Black Cloud territory. We'll need to be very careful for the next day, at least.
Robin, sitting atop Achillea's head, as was her wont, peeped as though in agreement while the others nodded, sharing expressions of concern among themselves. The feeling of tension and hypervigilance accompanied them as they pushed forward, going over or around hillocks as they put some distance between themselves and the orcish campsite. At one point, a kaleidoscope of curious butterflies with wings of sapphire, red, and gold followed them, but even these colorful creatures could not lift their spirits. By the time the sun was beginning to dip, the members of the party, traveling once again in single file, had discovered several other signs of orcish presence in the area: a boot print in dried mud, a rusted spearhead, and, on 4 occasions, little piles of stones stacked into roughly pyramidical shapes. Dureni explained to Achillea that they were something to do with the orcs' religion. He'd only seen a few of them in his entire life, and they'd always been solitary. It was somehow disturbing to see so many here. A collective feeling of relief came over the group when Tentir pointed ahead and quietly declared,
Woods ahead. I can just make out the tree line. If we hurry, we'll make it there before dark.
Despite their fatigue, each of them was happy to put in the effort to regain the cover of trees, so they ignored the ache in their feet and pushed themselves. Tentir's estimate turned out to be correct, and the party came within 100 yards of a thick wall of maple, oak, and juniper, with just a half hour of daylight remaining. The sky was now clustered with puffy clouds, their undersides lit with pink, orange, and magenta. But the companions' attention was not on them for long, because ahead and just a bowshot's distance away, out of the woods, strode 3 large figures. Orcs. As soon as the companions saw them, they knew they too had been seen. Strangely, instead of waving their weapons menacingly and calling out in challenge, the 3 orcs exchanged a few brief words between them, and then retreated back into the trees. I don't always do it, but earlier when I rolled up this wandering encounter, I decided to determine distance at random. So, off mic, I rolled 4d6 times 10 and got an encounter distance of 100 yards. I also rolled for surprise and learned that neither side would be. In the spirit of the truly random hex crawl, I even made a reaction roll, thinking that although 3 orcs wouldn't be threatened by a group of 4 obviously smaller and apparently weaker beings, they might not attack immediately. The dice surprised me. The orcs would not attack. Instead, they would try to leave. I wonder now, how would the PCs react to this turn of events? Their various personalities, I think, would make for a mix of opinions.
Chuchin's braid!
Swore Dureni, and then he wheeled on Cord, glaring at him.
Use your magic!
But Cord did not understand a word, and besides, it was too late. The orcs were already gone from sight. Achillea did not care for Dureni's tone, and had a different view of the situation.
Those might have been Bloodfoot orcs. We should let them go.
The older elf rolled his eyes.
And if you're wrong, what then? They'll raise the alarm, and soon we'll have every damned orc from every damned cave upon us.
He started after them, and Tentir, perhaps because elven culture gave power to the most senior of the group, followed, unslinging his bow as he went. Achillea felt her face turn hot, but she swallowed her anger and turned to Cord.
Come on.
She too ran for the trees in pursuit of the fleeing orcs, while a startled robin flew from her head. Cord, in confusion, came last. We find ourselves in yet another chase scene, but this time the script has flipped and the PCs are the ones doing the chasing. Let's get some dice and see how it'll play out. I'm giving the orcs a big bonus to account for their head start and for the fact that the forest will quickly break line of sight. A +2 to their roll feels about right. Actually, I'd give even more, but I have to justify the orcs' decision to run. One of them is probably wounded, otherwise they would have rushed into battle. Of course, there might be something else going on here, like an ambush. I suppose the dice will let us know in due course. Let's get into this pursuit. Round 1. The orcs. 1 + 2 is 3. Interesting. The party. A 4. The orcs leave a clear path of broken foliage, and their direction into the forest is easy to see, even in twilight. When Tentir discovers it and points it out to the others, they redouble their efforts. The party will now gain a +1 to their roll. Round 2. The orcs. A 6 + 2 is 8. The party. 4 + 1 is 5. The path the orcs have taken is too obvious for Dureni's liking. Once into the woods and the shadows close around them, he suddenly suspects a trap. He slows, and the hesitation costs him. The orcs will get an additional +1 to their roll. Each side now has 1 success of the 3 needed to prevail. Round 3. The orcs. 4 + 3 is 7. The party. 6 + 1 is 7. It's a tie. Ambush or not, Dureni pulls his sword and uses it to point along the broken trail of ferns and bushes.
That way!
He cries.
Don't let them escape!
My pursuit rule says that a modifier must be added every round, even a tie round. I think the orcs still have the advantage, so I'm increasing their bonus to +4. Round 4. The orcs. 3 + 4 is 7. The party. A 2 + 1 is 3. Tentir, now in the lead, crashes through the bush, bow in one hand and an arrow in the other. It's dark now, as the thick canopy has cut off almost all of the light supplied by the half-moon overhead. With the light so low, Tentir's infravision is beginning to compete with his day vision, and the result is that he cannot see well with either. In fact, he has lost the trail. The orcs have now won 2 pursuit rounds and only need 1 more. I'm increasing their lead to a +5, which all but ensures that they will escape in the next round. But let's see what the dice have to say. Round 5. The orcs. 4 + 5 is 9. The party. 3 + 1 is 4. Tentir has no choice. He has to give up. The orcs might have gone in any direction, and blundering around these unfamiliar woods in the gloom is foolhardy. He stops, breathing hard and waiting for the others to catch up, which, a few seconds later, they do.
Which way, Tentir? Which way?
Rasped Dureni between hard breaths. Tentir just shook his head.
Chuchin's braid!
Cursed Dureni again, swatting a nearby tree trunk with his sword in frustration. Then, in a final effort, he closed his eyes and listened for any sounds the escaping orcs might be making. But there was nothing. No sign of them at all. Reluctantly, he gave up, drawing his free hand down over his face in defeat. Thanks for listening to Tale of the Manticore. If you're enjoying the show and would like to help to support it, there are lots of ways to do so. You can recommend the show online or to friends. You can like and repost episode announcements on social media. You can pick up one of my offerings on DriveThruRPG. You can purchase a Tale of the Manticore t-shirt at www.beararts.store. And finally, you can rate or review the show on your podcatcher of choice. I am grateful for all of your support. Here's another kind listener review. This one was left by Winmore Games on Apple Podcasts. Winmore Games writes, "This is my favorite podcast. I thought I would take this momentous occasion to review Tale of the Manticore. There's so much to love about this story, but for now, I'll just say I'm so excited that we have another elf in the story. Can't wait to hear what happens next." Thanks very much, Winmore Games. The elf count is climbing. I truly appreciate your taking the time to leave that review, and of course I am delighted that you're enjoying the new season. By way of saying thanks, I'm going to write your name into Tale of the Manticore lore and say that Winmorgum will be Elvish for thank you. So, Winmorgum very much. Winmore Games. This episode features the voices of regulars Kyellen and Kevin Berenger, playing Dureni and Tentir, respectively. Thanks, as always, for your contributions, guys. It wouldn't be the same without you. For listeners who are curious to learn a bit more about Tale of the Manticore, I keep a blog where I post all kinds of show and RPG-related stuff, like art, maps, tables, crafts, and show notes. You can find it at taleofthemanticore.blogspot.com. To get in touch with me, I'm at ManticoreTale on X, Tale of the Manticore Podcast on Instagram, or taleofthemanticore@gmail.com. I would be delighted to hear from you. The adventure will continue on the next episode of Tale of the Manticore. It's the story where chaos rolls.